So picture this. Imagine you are standing on the flat, grassy expanse of Salisbury Plain.
Right, down southern England.
Exactly. And the air is biting, that kind of crisp chill that just settles right into your bones.
Yeah.
Before you rises the ancient, imposing silhouette of Stonehenge.
It's an incredible sight.
It really is. And it is just before sunrise on June 21st, so the summer solstice. The sky is turning this pale, bruised purple.
Oh, I can picture it.
Yeah, and as you are standing there, blowing into your hands to keep warm, you witness this remarkable spectacle. Walking among these massive, rough-hewn prehistoric stones is a solemn body of men and women.
Okay.
And they are dressed from head to toe in these flowing white robes. They are holding staffs, engaged in these slow, deliberate processions, muttering incantations as the first sliver of the sun finally breaches the horizon and hits the heelstone.
It's very cinematic.
Extremely. And if you walk up to one of the onlookers, someone sipping coffee from a thermos, and ask, who are these people?
Yeah.
You will invariably be told they are the Druids.
Which is just, it's accepted as fact by so many people.
Right. And honestly, in that moment, surrounded by the mist and the stones, it feels incredibly authentic. It feels ancient. It feels exactly right. But the question we're asking today in this deep dive is this: are these ancient people really in their rightful ancient place?
And that is the perfect question to start with, because the answer is going to completely upend how we view history.
I have a feeling we're about to ruin some people's solstice plans.
We definitely might, because to answer that question, we have to navigate a story that is part hard dirt archaeology, part ancient political propaganda, and, well, part just the bizarre history of human ideas.
Yeah.
We are relying entirely on the brilliant, deeply analytical book simply titled The Druids by the prehistorian Stuart Piggott. And Piggott, he establishes a framework right from the start that essentially serves as a warning to the reader.
Okay, a warning like what?
Well, he notes that the story of the Druid is this fascinating, almost toxic mix of hard archaeological evidence and what he wonderfully terms moonbeams from the larger lunacy.
Oh man, I love that phrase so much. Moonbeams from the larger lunacy.
It's great, isn't it?
It perfectly captures what happens when mundane history collides with wild human imagination. And that is the mission for this deep dive. We are going to disentangle this twisted historical and mythological skein for you.
And it is a very tangled skein.
It really is. We were going to start with the actual dirt of Iron Age Europe, look through the highly distorted lenses of Greek and Roman conquerors, travel to the cold scriptoriums of medieval Irish monks, and eventually end up exploring the wildly eccentric, romantic imaginations of later centuries.
Yeah, because Piggott's entire book is basically a masterclass in separating comfortable myths from deeply uncomfortable silent realities.
Right.
He points out that the Druids are a subject all too often given a cozy place among the comforts of unreason.
The comforts of unreason. That's another great phrase.
Yeah, because our human brains, they just do not like unanswered questions. And prehistory is essentially nothing but unanswered questions.
So we invent comforts. We fill in the blanks.
Exactly. We invent stories. Our goal today is to strip those comforts away and bring the subject back to rigorous reason.
So for everyone listening, I want you to pause for a second and imagine all the pop culture baggage you have about Druids. The white robes, the magical golden sickles, the mystical chanting at Stonehenge.
A whole package.
Right. Take all of that, put it in a box, and set it aside. Because to find the Druids a fact, we cannot start with texts. And we certainly cannot start with Stonehenge. We have to start in the soil.
Yes, the literal dirt.
We have to look at what the Celtic people of Gaul and ancient Britain actually left behind.
Because before anyone was writing down the word Druid, we only have the physical, tangible remains of the Celtic world. We were talking about Iron Age societies spanning across vast stretches of Europe.
Okay.
And when prehistorians look at these societies through purely archaeological methods, without any written diaries or histories to cheat from, they have to rely on a conceptual tool called the Hawkes scale of legitimate inference.
Okay, let's unpack this. The Hawkes scale. What exactly is a prehistorian inferring here?
Well, it was developed by the archaeologist Christopher Hawkes to measure how much we can reliably deduce from physical artifacts when we do not have a single written word to guide us.
Like a ranking system for guesses.
Sort of. It is essentially a ladder of confidence. At the very bottom of the scale, the absolute most reliable level is technology. Archaeology can confidently tell us that these were Iron Age people
And how do we know that for sure?
because we literally dig up their iron edge tools, their forged weapons, their chariot fittings. We can study the slag from their smelting hearths. There is no guessing there, right? The technology is a physical fact.
Okay, that makes sense. You hold a sword, you know they had swords. What's the next level up the ladder?
The next level is subsistence economics.
Meaning, like, how did they feed themselves and survive the winter?
Exactly. From the physical remains, we can see they lived in rustic farmsteads and peasant hamlets. Archaeologists find the post holes, which are these dark stains in the soil where massive timber beams once stood to hold up roundhouses.
Oh, wow. So just from stains in the dirt, we know where their houses were.
Right. And we find charred seed grains that tell us exactly what crops they grew. We find the bones of domesticated cattle and sheep, complete with butchery marks.
So we can literally see what they had for dinner.
Yes. So we can definitively map out their clearings in the encompassing, incredibly dense forests of ancient Europe. We know their economy was agrarian and pastoral.
Okay, so the bottom two rungs of the hawk scale are solid. We know they could chop down oak trees, forge iron swords, herd cattle, and build timber farms. But as we move up that scale towards things like social structure or, more importantly for our topic, abstract religious beliefs and theology,
Right, the ladder starts getting really wobbly.
it becomes almost impossible to climb, doesn't it?
It does. The physical evidence provides a fantastic framework of Celtic material culture. It shows a deeply rural, harsh, barbarian backdrop, but it has massive, impenetrable limits.
Right.
And here is a crucial fact that Pigott emphasizes, which, frankly, completely pulls the rug out from under centuries of mythology.
Okay, lay it on me.
There is absolutely no authentic pre-Christian inscription anywhere that includes any word for Druid. Not in Greek letters, not in Latin, not in any early Celtic form.
Wait, hold on. None at all. You're telling me across all of Gaul, all of Britain, all the areas the Celts lived for centuries, they didn't carve the word once?
Not a single time.
Not even on a rock somewhere.
Not on a stone pillar, not on a piece of votive metalwork thrown into a bog, not on a weapon. Nowhere does it say, I am a Druid, or this temple is dedicated to the Druids, or, property of the Archdruid. The dirt is completely silent on the word.
That is wild.
So therefore, connecting the Druids to any specific field monument, stone circle, or piece of ancient sculpture is purely 100% a modern assumption.
So if the earth is completely silent on the word druid, and the hawk scale only gives us iron axes, rustic farmsteads, and post holes.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to understand the highly specific theological doctrines of these priests using only that. It's like trying to understand the intricacies of modern constitutional law by examining a rusted tractor and a pile of bricks.
That is a very good analogy.
I mean, you can tell it was an agricultural society that built structure, sure, but the abstract philosophy, the laws, the poetry, it is totally invisible. So aren't we just chasing ghosts here? Why even bother with the text-free archaeology if it cannot tell us a single thing about the priests we are trying to study?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the absolute silence of the earth is exactly what keeps us intellectually grounded.
How so?
Because it is precisely because the archaeology only gives us that rusted tractor and those bricks that we are prevented from projecting our modern romantic fantasies onto them. The text-free archaeology acts as a rigid parameter.
It sets the boundaries.
Exactly. It provides a credible, internally consistent, thoroughly barbarian backdrop. It tells us what kind of society this was, which in turn tells us what kind of priesthood could actually exist within it.
Ah, okay, I get it. It acts as a reality check against the moonbeams from the larger lunacy.
Yes, exactly.
So if someone says the Druids were like advanced pacifist quantum physicists, the archaeology says actually they were living in mud-wattle roundhouses, raising cattle and fighting with iron swords, so probably not.
Precisely. Pigott points out the immense danger of projecting modern aesthetic sensibilities onto Romano-Celtic artifacts. Because this happens all the time in museums.
Utterly.
People will look at a piece of ancient Celtic stone carving maybe a severed head motif, which was very common in Latin art.
Right, the Celts loved their severed heads.
They really did. And modern people will describe it in the museum catalog as having an aloof, unearthly beauty or a serene, fiery inner vitality. And Pigott argues that this is just an arrogant fallacy. We are just making personal statements about our own 21st century aesthetic sensibilities.
Right. We look at a weirdly shaped stone head from Iron Age Gaul and say, ah, behold the deep mystical unworldliness of the Druidic mind.
Yes.
When the guy who carved it might have just been trying to make a scary face to ward off wolves from his sheep enclosure. Or Honestly, maybe he was just a terribly mediocre sculptor working with bad stone.
It is entirely possible. Piggott compares it to an anthropologist looking at a recent ritualistic ceremonial mask from an indigenous culture in Africa, Alaska, or the New Hebrides.
Okay.
If you do not intimately know the specific localized cultural context, like the specific myth that mask represents, you might look at it and think it looks noble or ecstatic or peaceful.
Right.
But you absolutely cannot make the unverifiable assumption that an early Iron Age barbarian 2,000 years ago felt the exact same emotional or spiritual impact you are feeling now in a brightly lit museum.
That makes total sense. We're just reading ourselves into the rocks. So the archaeology forces us to accept a physical reality. Iron tools, rustic farms, a harsh climate, a tribal hierarchy.
A very harsh reality.
This is a world much closer in spirit to the brutal mead hall culture of the Norse sagas or the early Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf than it is to some ethereal realm of enlightened pacifist philosophers wandering through pristine glades.
Very well put.
So the dirt gives us the stage, but it refuses to name the actors. Which means to actually hear the word Druid, we have to turn to the people who are writing things down. And unfortunately for the Celts, the people writing the history were the people actively trying to conquer them.
The Greeks and the Romans.
Right.
Since the Celts of this period relied entirely on an oral tradition passing down their laws, genealogies, and myths through spoken word and poetry, they left us no books. So we are forced to rely on the outsider's days.
Which is always problematic.
Highly problematic.
Yeah.
These classical texts referencing the Celts and the Druids range roughly from the 3rd century BC to the 4th century AD, but Piggott identifies a massive fundamental divide in these sources.
They aren't all saying the same thing.
Not at all. If you read them all back to back, they do not present one monolithic historical record. They actually fall into two very distinct, often contradictory literary traditions.
Okay, let's break those down, because this is fascinating. You have the Posidonian tradition on one side and the Alexandrian tradition on the other. Let's start with Posidonian.
So the Posidonian tradition is named after Posidonius. He was a Greek philosopher, ethnographer, and historian who actually traveled into Gaul in the 1st century BC.
So he was actually there.
Yes. Now, his original works are lost to history, but he was so highly regarded that later writers like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus quoted him extensively. Julius Caesar's famous commentaries on the Gallic War also fit firmly into this tradition.
Okay, so this school of thought is empirical. It is observational. It stems from actual boots-on-the-ground encounters with living Celtic tribes.
Exactly. This is the gritty war correspondence. In this tradition, the Druids are not mythical beings. They are known, very real political figures integrated deeply into the tribal society.
What were they actually doing, according to this tradition?
Well, Posidonius and Caesar describe them as an elite, learned class who are exempt from military service and taxation. They are described as most just, frequently acting as judges in both public and private tribal disputes.
So they were basically the ancient Celtic Supreme Court.
Pretty much. But they are also deeply associated with brutal practices, specifically human sacrifice. The famous Wicker Man accounts stem from this tradition.
Oh, right, the Wicker Man.
Yeah.
Burning people alive in giant wooden effigies. Not exactly the peaceful sage vibe.
No, not at all.
And then you have the other side of the coin, which is the Alexandrian tradition. And this one feels like it is describing a completely different species of human. It is idealizing, heavily romantic, and deeply philosophical.
Yes, this is where the enduring myth of the noble savage truly takes root in Western antiquity.
Which we see repeated over and over in history.
Exactly. The writers in the Alexandrian tradition, often based in intellectual hubs like Alexandria and Egypt, they weren't out in the freezing mud of Gaul observing tribal warfare.
Right, they were comfortable.
Very comfortable. They were civilized intellectuals sitting in sprawling, urbanized, highly corrupt cities, and they needed a philosophical foil. They needed a way to criticize their own society.
Ah, I see. So they looked at the barbarians in the forests of Europe and said, look at them. They don't have our corrupt politicians or our greedy merchants. They must be pure.
That is the exact psychological mechanism. So they portrayed the Druids not as tribal judges who occasionally sacrificed prisoners of war, but as intuitive, brilliant, ascetic philosophers.
They gave them a complete rebrand.
A total rebrand. Some of these Alexandrian writers went so far as to claim that the Druids were so incredibly advanced in their philosophical inquiries that they actually instructed the famous Greek mathematician Pythagoras.
Wait, really? Which is such a wild historical flex.
It really is.
They're basically saying, Pythagoras?
Yeah.
the guy who invented the foundational principles of geometry and Greek philosophy. Yeah, he learned all that from a guy in a forest in northern Europe wearing animal skins.
It is a classic literary trope.
It's the civilized man projecting a kind of pure, untainted, primordial wisdom onto the barbarian to shame his fellow citizens.
Right, but we shouldn't dismiss the intellectual capacity of the real Druids entirely, because even in the empirical, grounded Posidonian tradition, we get some incredible, specific historical encounters that Pigott highlights. Encounters that prove the Druids were highly educated in their own right.
Okay, like what? Give me an example of a real encounter.
Take Cicero, the great Roman orator and statesman. He actually had a personal face-to-face conversation in Rome with a leading Gallic Druid named Diviciacus.
Oh, wow. In Rome.
In Rome. And Cicero writes that they didn't just exchange pleasantries, they discussed physiologia.
Which, for our listeners, was the Greek term for natural science, philosophy, and the study of the physical world.
Yes. Cicero claims Diviciacus had a profound knowledge of nature. And Julius Caesar amplifies this in his own writings, noting that the Druids had much knowledge of the stars and their motion, the size of the world and the earth, and the power and majesty of the immortal gods.
That's fascinating. So there was undeniably a genuine, rigorous intellectual component to the Druidic priesthood. They were the keepers of the calendar, the astronomers, and the theologians of their people.
Exactly. The Romans recognized and on some level respected that intellect.
But they certainly did not respect their resistance, because it wasn't all just polite diplomatic chats about the cosmos in Roman villas. You also have the Roman historian Tacitus, who provides one of the most vivid, terrifying accounts of the Druids in action during the Roman conquest of Britain.
Oh, this is the famous scene at the Menai Straits in Wales, around 60 AD.
Right. I want you to picture the scene here. The Roman general Suetonius Paulinus has pushed his legions all the way to the western edge of Britain. He is trying to cross this narrow strip of turbulent water to attack the island of Anglesey.
Which was a massive stronghold for the Celtic tribes and the Druids.
Exactly. So the Roman soldiers are standing on the shore looking across the water, and standing on the opposite beach waiting for them is not just a standard army.
No, it is a psychological nightmare for the Romans.
Tacitus describes the British Druids acting like howling dervishes. They're pouring out terrifying, rhythmic, ritual curses with their hands raised to the sky. And weaving through the ranks of the Celtic warriors are women dressed in funereal black robes, their hair disheveled, carrying flaming torches.
It's just wild.
It was such a profound psychological assault that Tacitus says the highly disciplined Roman soldiers literally froze in terror. Their limbs were paralyzed by the sheer alien horror of the sight.
It is arguably the most cinematic scene in ancient Roman history. I mean, eventually the Roman generals snap their men out of it, they cross the water, and they completely massacre the Celts, destroying the sacred oak groves.
Right.
But that scene is a razor-sharp contrast to the polite philosopher Diviciacus. It shows the Druids as the absolute spiritual and psychological center of barbarian resistance against the Roman war machine.
And we also have to mention Pliny the Elder, who gives us our classic, almost magical natural history notes on the Druids.
Yeah.
He is the one who solidified the image of them having a deep reverence for the oak tree, their incredibly specific magical use of mistletoe cut with a golden sickle on specific phases of the moon, and their bizarre, almost alchemical search for magical snake's eggs.
Right. Pliny treats them almost like fascinating, dangerous flora and fauna in his Encyclopedia of the Natural World. But all of these accounts, Caesar, Cicero, Tacitus, Pliny, they force us to confront a massive problem of source bias.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting and where we have to critically examine the media of the ancient world. Julius Caesar is out there in Gaul for nearly a decade, fighting a massive, unbelievably bloody war of conquest.
It's a very bloody war.
He is subjugating millions of people, enslaving hundreds of thousands, committing what modern historians would comfortably categorize as genocide against certain Celtic tribes. And then, at the end of the campaign season, he sits down in his command tent to write a completely objective, unbiased anthropological history of the people he is actively slaughtering.
Right.
Come on. I have to ask, how much of Caesar's account of the Druids is a genuine observation of fact, and how much is just meticulously crafted political propaganda designed to impress the Senate back in Rome and justify his endless illegal wars?
This raises the most important question regarding the classical sources, and it is one Pigott addresses by deeply analyzing the Roman legal and moral mindset.
Okay, so how did they think about it?
You have to understand the specific filter through which Rome viewed the rest of the world. To the Romans, human sacrifice was not just a weird foreign custom. It was an abhorrent, unspeakable crime against the natural order of the civilized world.
Right, they saw it as deeply evil.
And furthermore, the practice of magic, the casting of spells, the use of curses, divination outside of state-sanctioned channels was strictly illegal. Rome instituted severe, repressive legislation against magic starting from the 2nd century AD onwards.
Wow. I didn't realize it was actually legislated against.
Very much so. So when the Romans write dispatches back to the capital saying, these Druid priests out in the woods are performing human sacrifices in giant wicker men and using illegal magic to curse our troops, they are not just acting as neutral anthropologists.
They're essentially painting the Druids as the ultimate enemies of civilized Roman law. They are terrorists.
Exactly. The Romans violently suppressed the Druids, not just because they were different, but because the Druids represented a completely alien scale of values that actively threatened Roman assimilation.
They couldn't be absorbed into the empire.
Right. The Druids were the cultural glue holding the tribal resistance together. By highlighting their most barbaric practices that very likely did exist, given the archaeological evidence of bog bodies and ritually sacrificed individuals, but were perhaps sensationalized in their scale.
Sure.
The Romans legally and morally justified their complete eradication.
And on the flip side, the Alexandrian tradition was born from civilized thinkers who were thoroughly disgusted by their own society's corruption. So they stripped away the blood, the human sacrifice, and the scary magic, and they kept only the noble philosophy.
They cherry-picked the best parts.
They turned the Druids into proto-Stoics. So both traditions, the Posidonian and the Alexandrian, are actively using the Druids for their own cultural, political, and philosophical purposes.
Which means we as modern readers trying to find the historical truth are forced to look at the Druids through two wildly distorted funhouse mirrors.
That's exactly what it is. Funhouse mirrors.
One mirror makes them look like bloodthirsty, magic-wielding monsters to justify a brutal military invasion. The other mirror makes them look like pacifist, enlightened sages to critique the decadence of city living.
And neither mirror shows the actual unvarnished face of the Iron Age priest. That is the tragedy of relying solely on the outsider's gaze. The Greeks and Romans knew so much about the Celts that we will never know, but their reports are invariably colored by their own imperial agendas.
Always.
So let me ask this. If the dirt is silent, and the Romans and Greeks were heavily biased outsiders, does that mean the Celts are completely voiceless? Is there any inside voice left at all?
Surprisingly, yes.
Oh, really? Where?
But it comes from centuries later, and it comes from an island the Roman legions never managed to reach. Let's cross the sea to Ireland.
Ah, Ireland. Because they never fell to Rome.
Exactly. Because Ireland never fell under the yoke of Roman rule, it did not experience the massive cultural disruption and urbanization that Gaul and Britain did. It does not have the classical Romanized archaeology aided by Latin texts.
So what does it have?
What it does have is a massive corpus of old Irish vernacular texts.
Okay, so we are talking about the great epic hero tales and sagas like the Ulster Cycle. The stories of heroes like Cuchulainn, massive cattle raids, and warring kings.
Yes, exactly those. Now, these texts are written recensions, meaning written edits, compilations, and transcriptions of much, much older oral traditions.
Right.
For centuries, this culture was passed down entirely by memory, by highly trained bards and poets. These stories were finally committed to writing by early medieval Christian scribes in monasteries shortly before the 5th century AD.
And Piggott points out that when you read these Irish tales, the society they depict is incredibly archaic. It is even simpler, more pastoral, and more rustic than the society Julius Caesar described in Gaul centuries earlier.
It perfectly, almost eerily confirms the broader archaeological picture we discussed earlier with the Hawk scale.
It matches the dirt.
It matches the dirt. The Irish texts describe a world that is strictly tribal. It is highly hierarchical, driven by complex client-patron relationships. It is entirely rural. There are no cities, no minted coins, no civic infrastructure.
Just farms and warlords.
Basically, it is a world whose economy is based entirely on cattle raiding, localized chieftain warfare, and strict magical ritual taboos known as gisa.
But wait. There is an obvious, glaring flaw in using these texts as historical evidence for ancient pagan Druids. I mean, these tales were written down by Christian scribes.
Yes, they were.
Monks sitting in cold stone monasteries, men who had dedicated their entire lives to a new monotheistic religion. How much of the original authentic pagan druidic reality could possibly have survived the heavy editing process of Christian monks who fundamentally viewed these old priests as heathens and competitors?
That is a totally valid skepticism.
Wouldn't a monk just edit out the pagan gods, sanitize the magic, or turn the druids into simple, cartoonish villains to make Christianity look better?
And Piggott addresses it head on. The texts are undeniably filtered. The Christian scribes certainly removed or altered the most overt, dangerous pagan theology.
Right. They weren't going to preserve instructions for sacrificing to a pagan sun god.
Of course not. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of how literature works, what matters is the underlying mundane social fabric that survived the editing process.
Ah, because a monk isn't going to bother censoring how a chieftain built his house or how compensation was paid for a stolen cow, because that was just the normal everyday backdrop of the story.
Exactly. The monks preserved the societal structure because it was the only world the stories made sense in. They preserved the cultural framework. And what is absolutely incredible to prehistorians is that this localized Irish framework perfectly corroborates the broad social structure seen by the Posidonia writers like Caesar and Posidonius centuries earlier in Gaul.
Wow.
It proves that despite the heavy Roman political bias, the underlying barbarian society the Romans described was indeed real.
That's amazing.
The specific tribal divisions, the emphasis on oral history, the deeply ingrained customary laws, the role of the seer and the bard, it is all right there in the Irish texts, functioning exactly as the Romans said it did.
It is like having two highly unreliable witnesses to a car crash.
Okay, how so?
Well, one is a Roman general who absolutely hates the driver and wants him in jail. The other is a Christian monk who wasn't even born when the crash happened, hates the car itself, and only heard about the crash from his grandfather.
Right.
But if both of these entirely different, heavily biased witnesses describe the exact same make and model of the car, the exact same intersection, and the exact same weather conditions, you can at least trust the physical setting of the event.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The Irish texts give us the internal cultural echo of the Celtic world. They show us that the Druids were part of a tripartite intellectual elite.
Tripartite meaning three parts.
Right. You had the bards who composed praise poetry, the vates or seers who practiced divination, and the Druids who were the supreme moral and legal authorities. They were embedded in a world very close to the one described by the ancient Greek poet Hesiod centuries earlier. A harsh, rural, heroic world governed by deeply ingrained, unwritten traditional laws.
So we have the facts, we have the silent dirt, we have the biased Roman accounts, and we have the fading Irish echo. But eventually the Roman Empire falls, the ancient world breaks up, the medieval Christian world takes over Europe entirely, and the Druids just vanish.
They disappear.
They evaporate from the cultural consciousness because a strictly Christian Europe had absolutely no use for the pagan past. They were submerged in the dark until the Renaissance happens.
Yes.
And this brings us to what might be the most fascinating part of Piggott's book, The Birth of the Symbol.
This is where the story pivots sharply from hard history to human psychology. During the Renaissance, classical scholars across Europe began to frantically rediscover, translate, and publish the lost texts of the Greeks and Romans.
The rebirth of learning.
Right. Suddenly people are reading Caesar again, they're reading Tacitus, they are reading Pliny's accounts of mistletoe and oak trees, and the Druids were resurrected into the modern mind.
But they were not resurrected as the Iron Age tribal judges they actually were. They were resurrected as people wished them to be.
Exactly.
Because, as Piggott notes, the text-free archaeology of the British and French landscapes was still silent. People saw these massive megalithic tombs and stone circles. They had these newly translated texts about ancient priests. And the antiquarians of the 17th and 18th centuries just started projecting their own wild theories onto the landscape. It was a blank canvas.
And the prime catalyst for this was John Aubrey in the 17th century. He was a pioneering antiquarian, essentially an early archaeologist, who rode his horse around the English countryside documenting ruins.
Okay.
He was the first person to tentatively, almost casually, associate Stonehenge and other massive prehistoric stone circles, like Avebury, with the Druids.
Wait, really? You are telling me that for thousands of years, nobody thought the Druids built Stonehenge? That is the single most famous thing about them today.
Nobody with any actual historical or archaeological backing thought that. Modern dating tells us Stonehenge was built in stages starting around 3000 BC.
Okay, and when did the Celts show up?
The Iron Age Celtic society that the Druids belonged to didn't emerge until roughly 500 BC. The factual Druids had as much to do with building Stonehenge as you or I have to do with building the Egyptian
Oh,
pyramids.
wow, they missed it by a mile.
They were separated by thousands of years. But Aubrey made the connection in his notes, and because people were desperate for a narrative, it ran like wildfire.
It is the ultimate historical viral trend, because once Aubrey made that speculative connection, the floodgates of imagination burst wide open. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, you had incredibly educated men, guys like Edmund Dickinson and Henry Rollins, who decided to give the Druids a biblical pedigree.
Oh, the biblical connections are wild.
They actually argued in published books that the oak groves the Druids worshipped in were the exact same type of sacred groves as the Plain of Mamre from the Old Testament, where Abraham pitched his tent.
Yes, they went to astonishing lengths to equate these European Iron Age barbarians with Old Testament patriarchs. They claimed the Druids practiced a pure and untainted patriarchal religion that had miraculously survived the Great Flood from the time of Noah.
What were they trying to accomplish with that?
They were trying to legitimize the ancient British past by tying it directly to the authority of the Bible.
It is incredible.
Hmm.
They basically retcon the Druids into the Book of Genesis. And Pickett explains this massive shift in how people viewed the past through two opposing philosophical concepts: hard primitivism and soft primitivism.
This is a crucial intellectual framework. Hard primitivism is the view of the ancient past as brutal, harsh, unforgiving, and savage. It is the Thomas Hobbes view that early human life was nasty, brutish, and short.
Which is pretty much what the archaeology says it was.
Right.
Soft primitivism, on the other hand, is the highly romanticized view. It is the idea of a lost golden age, where ancient people were pure, uncorrupted children of nature, living in perfect harmony with the earth, completely untainted by the greed and vice of modern society.
And think about what was happening in Europe, particularly in Britain, as society moved through the Age of Reason and crashed headfirst into the Industrial Revolution.
People started feeling incredibly uneasy.
Yeah, the skies were filling with coal smog. Cities were getting filthy, brutally crowded, and relentlessly mechanical. People felt violently disconnected from nature and the rhythms of the earth. They started craving a romanticized, mystical, pastoral past.
They desperately needed soft primitivism.
Exactly. And the Druids, who were already associated with oak trees and Stonehenge, thanks to Aubrey, were sitting right there, ready to be dressed up in whatever emotional baggage the 18th and 19th centuries needed to unpack. Which leads us directly into what Pickett highlights as the fringe characters of the 19th century. As the Industrial Revolution peaked, the study of the Druids abandoned the realm of antiquarian scholarship entirely and entered the realm of pure folklore, esoteric mysticism, and wild eccentricity.
Oh, this is easily the most entertaining part of the entire deep dive. The Victorian eccentrics. I want you to picture this. It is 1884. We are at the Pontypridd Rocking Stone in Wales, which is this massive, naturally balanced glacial boulder.
Okay.
Standing on top of this rock is a man named Dr. William Price. He is an 84-year-old man performing what he claims are ancient, authentic Druidic rites. But he's not wearing a flowing white robe. No, Dr. Price is wearing bright green trousers, a scarlet waistcoat, and a literal whole fox skin on his head and shoulders with his legs dangling down his back.
It's an amazing image.
And he is loudly chanting a song of the primitive bard to the moon.
The image is absurd, but Dr. Price wasn't just a harmless, eccentric local curiosity. He was a deeply radical thinker, a Chartist, a vegetarian, and a fierce opponent of Orthodox religion and medicine. He actually stood trial for performing a public cremation on the body of his infant son.
An infant son he had rather provocatively named Jesu Christ, Jesus Christ.
Yes. Cremation was widely considered illegal and deeply taboo in Christian Britain at the time. Price performed the cremation on a hilltop, claiming it was the true, ancient, Druidic way to dispose of the dead.
So what happened at the trial?
He was arrested, but he successfully defended himself in court, arguing that the law did not explicitly forbid cremation. He was acquitted, and his bizarre, self-styled Druidic action actually paved the way for the passing of the Cremation Act, making it legally accepted in Britain.
That's a huge historical impact.
But it is vital to understand that his version of Druidism owed absolutely nothing to ancient Celtic tradition. It was pure, idiosyncratic invention. It was rebellion dressed up as ancient history.
And he wasn't alone. It was like a contagion of weirdness. You had a guy named Myfer Morganwg who looked at that same ancient rocking stone in Wales and decided it wasn't quite Druidic enough for his tastes.
Right, so what did he do?
So he literally hired men to haul in extra stones and arrange them in a massive serpentine pattern around the boulder to improve the ancient monument. He just DIY'd a prehistoric site to match his imaginary version of history.
Unbelievable.
And then there was a man named Maurian, also known as Owen Morgan.
Ah, Maureen is a fascinating, almost tragic case study of historical syncretism gone completely mad. He wrote these massive, bizarre, densely packed books, printed locally in Wales, linking his imagined version of Druidism to absolutely everything in world history.
He linked it to ancient phallic worship. He linked it to the Holy Grail. He linked it to the Zodiac. He even wrote a book where he somehow equated the ancient mythical Welsh bard Taliesin with Jesus Christ. He managed, through sheer force of cognitive dissonance, to reconcile his own strict Welsh Calvinistic Methodism with this wild, pan-global, invented Druidic mysticism.
It's a lot to process. And we cannot forget the climax of this absurdity, the 1878 Eisteddfod. An Eisteddfod is a traditional Welsh festival of literature, music, and performance.
Okay.
At the 1878 event, the presiding archdruid of the festival, which was a purely invented title, of course actually stood up and offered solemn public prayers to the Hindu deity Kali, the goddess of time and destruction.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Let's take a step back. Why did perfectly respectable, highly educated, or at least highly motivated 18th and 19th century people suddenly decide to put on fox skins, vandalize ancient monuments with snake patterns, pray to Hindu deities at Welsh poetry festivals, and write massive volumes of historical fan fiction?
It is a profound psychological shift.
I look at this behavior and I immediately think of modern internet subcultures. You go on YouTube or Reddit today and you find people weaving these massive, intricate conspiracy theories connecting ancient aliens in Egypt to the Illuminati in the 1700s to modern geopolitical events. It is the exact same psychological impulse, just operating with a different coat of paint.
That is a very astute connection. The underlying mechanism is identical. As Pig explains, this era is the exact moment where the Druids officially stop being fact and become pure symbol.
Right.
As Western society became rapidly industrialized, as the world became increasingly mechanical, mapped, and mathematically understood, basically less magical, these incredibly accommodating blank slate Druids became a canvas.
They could be whatever anyone wanted them to be.
They were a massive projection screen for psychological misfits, lonely cranks, romantic dreamers, and people who felt utterly alienated by the modern world. The Druids provided a socially acceptable way to invent a lost golden age of pure wisdom and magic that these people felt was brutally missing from their Victorian lives. They are the ultimate manifested comforts of unreason.
Which brings us to the profound conclusion of Pigott's book, where we have to explicitly separate the muddy reality from the pristine dream. Because, as Pigott lays out in his final thesis, the story of the Druids hasn't just in one long, confusing timeline. It actually happens in three distinct, almost unrelated stages.
Right. He breaks the entire phenomenon down into three categories: Druids discovered, Druids observed, and Druids imagined.
Okay, let's clearly define them. Stage 1, Druids discovered.
This is the factual priesthood, the archaeological reality. These are the members of an ancient Indo-European social order deeply rooted in the harsh prehistory of Europe. They were a real, functioning elite class in a barbarian, tribal society.
The ones leaving post holes and using iron edge tools.
Exactly. They practiced a religion that syncretized incredibly ancient prehistoric traditions regarding the seasons, agriculture, and tribal law. They were the people living in those rustic farmsteads, holding together the delicate social fabric of the Celtic tribes without ever writing a single word down.
Got it. Stage 2, Druids observed.
These are the real flesh and blood people encountered by the Greeks and Romans, the actual individuals written about by Posidonius, Julius Caesar, and Tacitus. These were real priests, judges, and scholars navigating the brutal existential threat of an expanding Roman Empire.
So guys like Diviciacus.
Right. They were the men like Diviciacus who stood in Rome discussing natural philosophy with Cicero, and they were the terrifying howling figures on the shores of Anglesey, desperately cursing the Roman legions to protect their homeland. They were real people complex, both incredibly just and incredibly brutal.
And finally, Stage 3, Druids imagined.
This is the rumor that completely outlived the reality. This is the transformation of that factual Iron Age priesthood into the noble savage myth of the classical world, which then morphed into the white-robed biblical patriarchs of the Renaissance antiquarians, which finally exploded into the modern eccentric inhabitants of Stonehenge celebrating the summer solstice.
It is the symbol, completely untethered from the historical fact.
Completely untethered.
But the real penetrating question Pickett asks at the end of the book is, why did the symbol win out so decisively?
Yeah.
I mean, if we have the hard archaeology and we have the historical accounts, Why do 99% of people today still picture the Druids as these mystical, white-robed magicians peacefully worshiping at Stonehenge?
The answer lies in a deep, somewhat uncomfortable psychological truth about human nature. Humans are fundamentally, viscerally uncomfortable with the anonymity of prehistory.
We don't like the void.
We don't. When we look back at the vast, silent, stretching millennia of human existence, the thousands upon thousands of years of the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, it is terrifyingly anonymous. It is just a void.
We don't want to read a textbook about Iron Age typologies or subsistence economics or the dating of post holes. It's dry. It lacks a protagonist. We need a story.
We crave names. We crave characters with motivations. We want simplistic narrative explanations for incredibly complex, slow-moving historical evolutions. The ancient world is overwhelmingly vast and silent. But the Druids, the imagined, symbolic, romantic Druids, provide a comfortable, named cast of characters.
They give a face to the silence.
They make the incomprehensible, terrifyingly silent past feel relatable, magical, and human. We project our own desires backwards so we don't feel so alone in the timeline of history.
And think about why this matters for your own life right now, specifically for how you consume information and media, because we do this exact same thing today. When we look at history, whether we are trying to understand the ancient Celts or the founding fathers of our own countries, or even geopolitical events that happened just 50 years ago, we have to ask ourselves a really hard question.
It's a very necessary question.
Are we genuinely looking for the complex, anonymous, often highly contradictory truth? Or are we just looking for a symbol? Are we just looking for a convenient cast of pure heroes and absolute villains that cleanly validates what we already want to believe about the world? Because if we only look for the symbol, if we ignore the Hawk's scale of reality and just embrace the myth, we fall right back into the comforts of unreason. We are just wearing a fox skin and howling at the moon.
If we connect this to the broader arc of human culture, as long as humanity needs an escape from the crushing complexities and anxieties of the present moment, the Druids or symbols functioning exactly like them will survive. We will always invent the past we desperately need.
So they aren't going anywhere.
Not at all. Pickett ends his book with this brilliant, slightly ironic, but deeply true thought. The Druids are so incredibly adaptable as a symbol that they might easily adapt to whatever the future holds. He jokes that tomorrow's Druids might simply trade their white robes for white laboratory coats, becoming mystical astronomers writing complex computer programs based on the ancient Celtic colony calendar.
Because the symbol doesn't care about facts.
Right. The symbol evolves to fit whatever the current age finds most awe-inspiring and comforting.
And that is the massive, twisted journey we have taken today. We started in the very real, damp dirt of Iron Age farmsteads, where anonymous Celtic tribes forged weapons and cleared forests to survive. We moved through the highly biased, politically charged, propagandistic accounts of Roman generals and Greek philosophers looking for an angle. We deciphered the fading echoes preserved by medieval monks in Ireland, all the way to the 19th century eccentrics DIYing ancient monuments and inventing exotic rituals. We have tracked the complete evolution of the Druid from hard fact to absolute symbol.
It is a profound reminder that history is not just a passive record of what happened. History is an active construction of what we remember, and more importantly, how we choose to remember it to serve our present needs. The Druids of fact belong entirely to the silent earth. The Druids of symbol belong to us.
Which leaves me with one final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Think about the everyday, highly mundane rituals you participate in right now. The specific hunched posture you adopt when you hold your phone up to your face. The highly choreographed, unspoken rules of standing in line at your local coffee shop. The repetitive, synchronized movements you and dozens of strangers make in a brightly lit room at the gym. Now, imagine civilization collapses. 2,000 years from now, a future society unearths the fragmented texts, the corrupted hard drives, and the rusted artifacts of our time. They don't know our names. They don't know our daily anxieties. What kind of wild, romantic, noble, savage myth will they project onto you? When they see the rusted remains of our world, what comforts of unreason will we become for them? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious. We will catch you on the next one.